Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Alan Thomas, and I'm the SBA Region 4 Administrator, and I would like to welcome everyone to another edition of the SBA's Elevating Small Business Series. And today, we are going to celebrate rural entrepreneurs and the innumerable contributions that they continue to make across the United States economy. This event is being recorded, and it will be made available approximately 24 hours after the event for you to be able to review. So we're excited about that. It is my honor to lead today's discussion, but first, let me share a little bit about my background with you. As Region 4 Administrator, I oversee the SBA's programming and operations in the SBA's Southeast region, which covers Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. That's right, all the entire Southeast United States. I was born and raised in rural Eastern North Carolina, in that community, one of the most economically challenged rural areas in the country. Through a good education and a great upbringing and circle of folks, I was very blessed. Had the opportunity to have opportunities in life, and and now a long time private businessman, an entrepreneur, and a public servant on a number of levels. I bring that experience to this role with SBA in 2020. I actually was one of the ones, along with my team, that was pursuing a PPP loan. So I've lived on all sides of this equation, and excited to be here with SBA. We had over 480 employees at that time, and fortunately, we were able to make it through to the other side and without having to lay anyone off and have success there. But that really generated my interest in SBA, and I'm a former 3-term mayor of a city, Greenville, North Carolina, about 100,000, a university city, which I led during the post-recession recovery and economic expansion in the earlier part of the 2000s. So my main area of business as an entrepreneur, I also co-founded a healthcare technology startup company from an extra room to grow to processing over 18 million patient records a day, 160 medical facilities in about 36 states. And so I've been very blessed to have some good business experience. And I was appointed by Governor Roy Cooper in North Carolina as executive director of the North Carolina Global Transport that focused on global multimodal transportation and logistics. So a lot of the things that we're talking about today really hit home for me. That was located in a very rural area in the Carolinas. So I was very proud of being able to spearhead growth in manufacturing and jobs, innovation in that space. So yes, I do have a strong affinity for this topic and those that are going to be joining us here today as we expand on the economic opportunities for rural business and entrepreneurs. So the SBA is proud to support the rural business community and help entrepreneurs with access to capital, to mentorship and business opportunities. And in addition, the SBA has formed an alliance with the USDA and other federal agencies to deliver much more needed services to both the urban and rural communities. And we'll discuss more about this with our panel of participants. And joining us today, a couple of folks, and we'll talk in a moment, Terri Billups, who manages the rural development effort for SBA. But before we meet our panelists, let me share a few quick rural basic statistics for you guys. So rural as a population is an extremely diverse group in the United States, and it represents any geographic area that is not located within an urban center. Here are a few rural business facts and figures. In 2018, rural counties in the western part of the country led the nation in rural growth. The number of establishments in those counties grew by 2.44% in 2018. That rate of growth was less than 1% for rural counties in the South, and near 0% for rural counties in the Midwest, and a negative 1% for rural counties in the northeastern part of the country. The 5 states with the highest rate of rural growth were the western states of the U.S. of New Mexico, Oregon, Hawaii, Utah, and California. So like their urban brethren, 40% of rural small business owners also have trouble of accessing capital and end up requiring more than 40% of their own personal savings to be able to start up, launch, and grow their business. So now let's take the opportunity to meet our 2 panelists who will be talking with us and chatting with us today. As I introduce each of them separately, I'd like to ask them to take a couple of minutes, and I'll probably pull up Terri first, but to tell us about what you do and tell us about your background and the exciting elements that you're into with your topic. So the two people joining us today are Terri Billups. She's the SBA Acting Director and Deputy Director for the Office of Rural Affairs. And also joining us is Morgan Beavers, who's the Business Development Officer for Graylee Construction and Demolition LLC of Austin, Arkansas. So we are so great to have them with us. But we will begin with introductions first from Terri Billups. And Terri, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Alan, and it is my pleasure to be participating in today's Elevating Small Business series and joining you and Morgan to talk a little bit about what I do and the services that SBA offers to our small business community, particularly in rural environments. Like you, I grew up in a rural area, a small coal mining town, so I think there's a song that's something about being a coal miner's daughter. That definitely applies to me, and it's two generations, so my grandfather and my father. So I understand rural communities and farming. It's actually a benefit for me having grown up in the community, because in my current role, I am tasked to understand what's going on in America's rural communities, and that includes not only all of our states, but also our U.S. territories. So having that background and understanding some of the challenges and just living there, let alone being a small business owner, I think allows me to really be able to look through the lens of what the folks who live and work in small communities are faced with. So in my I'll call it core responsibilities, I'm really tasked to understand the challenges in rural America, particularly as small businesses, try to start, grow, recover, and also for agency representation. So I really am the SBA face when it comes to rural for the SBA. So I participate in a couple different councils as the SBA representative, one of which is based on rural health. Another one is the Rural Prosperity Initiative. It's actually RPN is the acronym, and it's Rural Prosperity Network, and that's driven by the USDA. That's relatively new, and it's focused on 5 states within the US and particular communities within those states that are in need. And we have actually boots on the street, so to speak, living in those communities. So the USDA has onboarded folks to actually live and work in those communities. So I'm the SBA liaison for that as well. And the 5 initial communities on that are Kentucky, Arizona, some of the tribal areas, New Mexico, Mississippi, and I got to cheat and look at my notes a little bit. Georgia. I always forget Georgia. Right. I don't know how I do that. So in addition to all of that, I really, like to work with the small businesses as well and try to identify the gaps that, we have in our programming so that we can, go to work on trying to figure out what we can do to really help small businesses with things like access to capital, which you mentioned 40% of small businesses still have a challenge with. Of course, those government contracting opportunities and also technical assistance.
That's great, Terri, and you do touch so many parts of the country, and you're doing a phenomenal job. And we want to hear more from the coal miner's daughter, or granddaughter, and hear more about what you're doing for so many people across the country. Next, I want to give a chance for Morgan Beavers, who's the Business Development Officer with Graylee Construction and Demolition. Hi, Morgan. How are you? And thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So I work with my husband. He owns Graylee Construction Demolition. I am the business officer, development officer. And what we do is, it's in our name. We primarily do construction and demolition. He founded the company in 2016. Funnily enough, I had just had our oldest daughter, so really not in most people's eyes the greatest time to start a business, right? But it was meant to be. And so in 2016, he started this firm with just himself. So he was the only employee, and he had a dump truck and a dream, is what I like to say, and so he is a 3rd generation bridge builder. And so he has a degree in construction management. He had all the tools for the technical side of building a business. He knew how to build a bridge anyway, right? And so we started out primarily doing demolition projects, bridge building, all those kinds of demolition projects. and we grew from, I think our first year in business, we started off about $175,000 worth of sales. So a pretty meager first year in business. To last year, we did over $2 million. So it really a huge growth trajectory. And the biggest pieces to that were we started off in demolition, and then we were working for municipalities, local governments, that kind of thing. And then we were able to transition into federal contracting. And the conduit for us to be able to transition into federal contracting is, well, first of all, PTAC, Procurement Technical Assistance Center, was a big part of that, but so was the SBA. And so my husband is a disabled person, and so he was able to get into the 8A program, and that really acted as a catalyst towards us focusing on federal projects. And so we have really been able to do so many wonderful, beautiful projects for, we've worked in Fort Smith at the Air Base, and we've worked for the Corps of Engineers and done some really beautiful construction projects for them. And it all started just with my husband in a dump truck. It's really an exciting time.
That's such a great story, and there's so many that have similar. When I get a chance to travel across the region and talk about, like you said, a dream in a dump truck, right? And they know how to do business, but the intimidating part is often the business end of the equation and how all that really comes together and the scale of it all. But you've got a great story. Look forward to getting a little bit more into that. But as we begin this discussion, we can't ignore the other partner in the room. It's what the past couple of years have been like, especially for rural communities. I often tell people, as a mayor, I faced 2 or 3 hurricanes while in office, and what I often found is that the large urban and metropolitan areas, they're resilient. They respond fairly quickly, but the rural areas, many times, you see the residue from 2 or 3 storms ago, and when businesses barely operate, kind of above a certain line, and then sometimes they don't come back. So how has it been the past couple of years, speaking of dealing with the challenges, with you guys? And I'll start with Terri. But Terri, talk a little bit about the last couple of years and what that has been like. What has the pandemic's impact been for small businesses? And we've all seen so many, you either adapt or you go away. So businesses pivoting to find the optimal way to be able to be not just to survive, but to thrive. So Terri, from your perspective, how has the pandemic impacted small businesses, and how are they adjusting?
Well, Alan, as you mentioned, a lot of the small businesses, whether in a rural or urban area, have had to pivot. And I think that's a really interesting lens to look through, because some of the small businesses that, might have been in business doing one thing, and let's just take a restaurant, for example, during the pandemic, all of a sudden, if you lived in an area that was closed, and we all went through that process where we had to, socially distance, they all of a sudden couldn't entertain folks in their restaurants. So of course, they had to pivot and do something different. So I think the businesses that have been able to recover the quickest are the ones that were able to do, I'll call it, some sort of reinvention. So whether that was an adjustment to their business model so that they were still able to continue. So in that restaurant example, perhaps just doing takeout. And I think a lot of them are still in that mode. I think a lot of them have gone back and examined how they conducted their business initially, and there might have been some efficiencies that actually resulted from the pandemic, because they're finding that they can meet their customers and meet the needs of their customers by doing things differently. So sometimes that means efficiency improvements. So, whatever that means to that small business, but I think it's also partly dependent upon where they are in the country. And I'll give you an example. Last week, I was in rural Nebraska, and I was in the western part of Nebraska, and talked to some small businesses there and folks who supported them, and even some banks. And what they said is they felt that their small businesses weren't as impacted as other parts of the country, which I found quite interesting. So they said that they felt like it was almost like business as usual for them. However, they're still experiencing some of the same challenges that we're seeing in urban markets. For example, finding enough employees, not having to adapt your working hours, as a result of the fact that you don't have enough employees. So I think it depends where you are. I think we've had some areas of the U.S. and our territories that have been able to quickly recover. Some say they didn't miss a beat, although I think that's a very small percentage. But I think the ones that have been most successful are the ones that have been able to tailor their business and really use your word, pivot, to be able to still conduct business or modify their business or expand it in some cases to do other things that met the needs. And one of those examples is if we think back to when the pandemic initially started and we had like distilleries, right? So all of a sudden they had to switch and start producing hand sanitizer. So I'm sure that was in many of their, business plans to just be a distillery, never to be a hand sanitizer producer, but yet they were able to continue and expand the portfolio of what they're able to do just based on necessity.
Absolutely. And so I would ask the same question, turning to you, Morgan. We talk about, finding available, because you're in the trucking demolition business, and talk about how the pandemic, how that impacted you guys, because you grew this business during the pandemic. But what has it been like here recently for your company?
Absolutely. So I'd like to go back to kind of 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. So being in construction, being in demolition, a lot in the very beginning of the pandemic, many non-pivotal, non-urgent projects got pushed back. So project walks, any meetings like pre-construction meetings, they started to get pushed back and pushed back and pushed back before everyone pivoted to virtual, right? And so there were a few months between March and I would say May or June of 2020 where there was kind of almost a pause in construction is what we saw. It was just like a momentary freeze where projects were just not moving forward if they were not already underway. So I don't have to tell you from a contract, from gaining contract perspective, that is a really difficult time. No new work is coming in, and so that was a huge challenge. And so the good thing is the PPP program and all of those things kicked in during that time and allowed businesses like ours to maintain our employees, right? And to continue to remain in business during that time. If it weren't for that, we're not the only small business that really, really would have suffered during that time. Then you had the employee shortage. Absolutely. So fast forward, people start to pivot to do virtual meetings and things like that, and projects begin to go again. But also you have so many people working from home. And so whenever we had transitioned to working in the federal spaces more at this point, however, it does seem that some of the processes go a little bit slower when there's that nobody's in the office type of situation, so that sometimes the communication can lag a little bit. So really having to be really good communicators during that time was really important. But what I'll tell you, and I think anybody in construction will tell you, in the last 2 years, finding qualified employees has been extraordinarily difficult, particularly, let's say, truck drivers. I know you mentioned that. That's a huge need right now. And so what we did to cope with that was we just started cross-training employees as much as we could, and paying them as such, and making sure that we're taking good care of our employees that are fulfilling multiple roles, while we ourselves are also fulfilling multiple roles. I mean, that was pivotal during that time.
That's a very good point about having cross-functional training and being able to cover for other roles and other positions. And Terri, we were into this new environment now, post-pandemic, and it kind of comes in waves, right? There are still a few challenges here and there. Let's talk about barriers a little bit, Terri, if you will. Let's talk about, we know that the cost of goods, have definitely gone up. Some of the supply chain issues, the lead times on some product, has been a little bit of a challenge, depending on the industry and spaces that you're in. But what are some of the barriers, Terri, that you feel that small businesses in particular are facing in the rural communities, and opportunities that they, again, may be able to look at other methods or being able to overcome this in the short term?
Sure. I think Morgan brought up a couple of really good points about the challenges that Graylee faced, during the pandemic, and now I'll call it in this recovery and post-recovery phase. And of course, employee retention, that's going to be one of the keys. And I think, Morgan probably gave a really good recommendation, and that's take really good care of your employees, offer them some development opportunities so that you can expand what they're capable of to make their jobs, more interesting maybe for them, and perhaps, pay them accordingly. I think that's, something really important. And that's probably a barrier for a lot of small businesses now as they get into this recovery, post-recovery phase, is not only, finding new employees, but that retention piece, because we are in a market that, if you're looking for a job, it's pretty easy to find one. So you have to really be taking care of the folks that you already have. In addition, some of the other barriers are the ones that we see historically. I would say probably primarily, and you touched on this in your opening, is the access to capital piece. So whether you've pivoted and now you're doing something else, you're always going to have those capacity issues when it comes to financial capacity, because now all of a sudden, if you're doing something you hadn't intended and it's more, it's more costly for you, and you mentioned also, just supply chain issues, all of that factors into, these businesses not only being able to just remain viable, but now scale up so that they can, embrace all of these other drivers that they have to deal with, whether it's, the cost of goods sold, whether it's, the cost of employees, all of those things are presenting challenges. So I think, of course, the access to capital is always going to be an important piece of it. And, hopefully folks know that, past PPP and EIDL, SBA has lots of loan programs that can help them if they don't qualify commercially. But that's one of the things that SBA, and particularly me in rural, I've been working with the FDIC and the USDA on some programming to make sure that there's access to capital. So if you're like in ag or ranching, that you also have access to capital, because you technically are small businesses. A lot of folks don't see themselves as that, but that is a big piece of being able to remain viable, is really accessing capital. So whether you get it commercially through SBA, USDA, FDIC has a big push to really look at our areas that are unbanked and underbanked. And this is something that I think folks realized whenever we started into the pandemic, that if they didn't have a really good relationship with their lender, all of a sudden, they're scrambling around trying to find someone to apply for that PPP loan. So, again, I think those things are really important. I don't want to call them barriers. To me, they're more like opportunities and considerations for our rural businesses. So, wherever they are in that cycle of recovery, post-recovery, they really need to be thinking of these things and knowing that we offer resources to help them. And of course, our resources are free of charge. So you can't get a better deal than that.
That's right. And we talk about the PPP. Most of us are familiar with that, but the payroll protection program and a number of the programs that were really a gating item that allowed to, no pun intended, Morgan, but to bridge over the financial shortcomings of the past couple of years, help folks to survive. But you guys launched, and Morgan, and grew through the pandemic. What were some of the other barriers that you dealt with operating in a rural environment beyond the pandemic piece? And also, how did you tap into some resources? Because for small businesses to succeed, you've got to be resourceful. And then you got to be able to work with others and communicate, as you mentioned before, be able to communicate well and not be afraid to ask. So talk about some of the other, some of the growing pains that you had, and what are some great resources that you tapped into? And then we'll let Terri talk about some resources as well.
Yeah, I would love to. So I want to touch on the barriers piece first. So one of the things that jumps out to me most that we struggle with as a rural small business is, in order to have the sales that we need, we have to serve a very large geographic footprint. Okay, so whereas if you operate in a metropolitan area, you may be able to have a smaller business footprint while remaining functional. We have to cover the entire state of Arkansas, right? Our company, Graylee, covers the entire state of Arkansas in construction services. When you are spread out like that, inflation, especially of certain things, hits your business harder. And the thing I'm talking about is fuel. Okay. So when you are spread out like that, not only do demolition and construction require a great deal of on-site fuel usage, your employees are having to travel such far distances to get to projects. And so that is one way that I feel rural businesses were disproportionately affected by fuel inflation, because we've experienced it firsthand, right? You did a project let's say you bid a project at the end of 2021 and you're executing it in 2022, those fuel prices are vastly different, differences that we haven't seen in a really, really, really long time, things no one could have planned for, right? So that is a huge impact on rural small businesses. That does impact metropolitan small businesses, but not to the same degree, just in my opinion. So that's one major barrier there. And then some other barriers are absolutely access to capital. I mean, Terri is 100% correct. I mean, in my opinion, whenever you start a small business, you are such a risk, right? Like that's what you hear all the time. When you go to talk to a lender, you hear risk, risk, risk. And I will say that when we started Graylee, we started with our own money, right? There wasn't someone backing us or anything like that. But luckily, people don't necessarily have to do it that way. We have a partner, a company that we're partnering with. He just started an equipment servicing company. So he's going around and servicing equipment, and he was able to get an SBA loan to back his startup, which was awesome and cost him so much less heartache than us having to put in our own nest egg. You know what I mean? So those things are there, and the SBA is one fantastic resource when it comes to lending, right? But there's a piece there that I want to talk about too. Whenever she was mentioning about I'm not sure if it was her or you that said if you didn't have an existing relationship with a lender whenever it was time to get your PPP, that was a struggle. Absolutely. The people who already had existing relationships got their PPP money faster, guaranteed. So having a relationship and also knowing when it's time to make a change in those relationships. So I have what I refer to as the triangle. So in construction especially, but I imagine this is true in all businesses, there are three cornerstones, right? You have your lender, you have your accountant, and you have your insurance agent, right? Those three people. And for construction, it's your insurance and bonding agent, because you have to be able to bond projects, right? So those three pieces, those three individuals need to have good communication. This goes back to communication, right? So your lender is one of those pieces, and your lending affects your bonding and your insurance, and your lending and your accountant, your lender and your accountant definitely need to be, solid there. So without that team, without that triangle, you're weak. Okay, if you have one of those pieces, your foundation is just weak. And so making sure that you have those three people in the right places, and not being afraid to change, not being afraid to go, this accountant is just not working with my lender, or this insurance agent is just not talking to my accountant, just taking out the piece and replacing it with a puzzle piece that's going to fit. Don't be afraid to do that. Make good relationships with the people that work, and don't be afraid to edit if necessary.
And that's a great point you made about the triangle. I hope folks are taking some great notes right now, because you're really giving a 101 of, and it doesn't cost you anything right now to go ahead and create those relationships and communicate. Ask your circle of your network of folks of, who's productive and who's resourceful in accounting, banking, and this bonding element. And we all know the President Biden and the infrastructure bill that passed through Congress recently, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and all of those folks are going to need exceptional access to more bonding. And Terri, talk about bonding a little bit and why that's so important for the rural community. Many may not even realize that SBA itself is a provider for surety bonding for companies to be able to take advantage of that as part of that triangle that Morgan mentioned. What are some of the great resources and jewels of knowledge here for rural business owners they should know about solutions for some of these systemic barriers for how to be able to start and grow a business?
Sure, and I really like the triangle suggestion as well, because that makes it really easy to understand. And being in construction, the bonding piece is a huge part of that. And a lot of folks aren't even aware of the fact that SBA does have the surety bonding program, but we do. So if that's something you're not familiar with and you're in an industry that requires bonding, such as construction, I encourage you to look it up. So SBA has some partners that work with us on the bonding. So take a look and figure that out, because just like the access to capital piece, if you can get your own bonding, great. But if you need some assistance on that bonding piece, again, that's something that SBA can help with. And it sort of mitigates the risk to the bonding company with the SBA involved. So I think as you try to look at your business and look at ways that you can either build that capacity if you're in that recovery phase, or if you're, trying to do something a little bit different, it might be uncharted territory for you. So you're expanding what you do. That's one way to overcome one of those barriers, is the bonding piece. That's something SBA can provide. If you're not sure even what that is or how it works for you, our network of 1,400 resource partners throughout the U.S. And the fact that you are in rural communities, the one thing the pandemic has taught us is that you don't have to drive someplace to get someone to help you. Hopefully you have really good broadband in your area. And if you don't, that's something else. We're trying to make sure that as advocates for small businesses that we're connecting our district offices with the folks who have the funding, so that we have you. I'll put it that way. We have your backs when it comes to broadband. We don't get the funding. However, we're working with the agencies that do get the funding and are pushing it out to the state. So Alan mentioned the infrastructure piece of it. That's something that SBA is making sure that all 68 of our district offices are connecting with their state broadband offices or coordinators, whichever the case may be, just to make sure if there's an area within their states that needs just infrastructure, that we're there to assist. And if you're a business that potentially could do some of that work, again, hopefully that's something that you can explore. And if you need some assistance on figuring out from the state perspective what that looks like for you, it might not be SBA that has that knowledge, but I can assure you somewhere in our network, someone has some expertise when it comes to local, county, state. So I know that Morgan mentioned the procurement technical assistance centers, another great partner. We have our small business development centers, our women's business centers who see men as well. We have our veteran business outreach centers, our community navigators. So if you didn't know what any of these resources are, again, go to the SBA website and look under local resources. And the beautiful thing is you put in your zip code and it will tell you who's local. And I realize if you're rural and remote, local can mean a few hours, but as long as you have a telephone, you can connect with someone. And again, I think I mentioned, but I'm going to say it again. And the cost for most of those resources is no cost. So, if you don't utilize them, I always say you're not getting as good of a return on your tax dollars as you could be.
That's a great point. And we all want to get the best return on investment that we could possibly get when it comes to being able to maximize those resources. Because I assure you, as I travel across the country, I am meeting so many small businesses that are absolutely leveraging this to great success. But I love what you said, Terri. We're here to have your back, right? We're here to bring able to connect you with the resources. You've just got to reach out and communicate. So this is a great point, speaking of having your back, to talk about, to mention last year, the SBA reconvened the Council on Underserved Communities. Now, the council was initially established in 2010, and it provides advice, ideas, and opinion on SBA programs and services and issues of interest to small businesses in underserved communities. And these communities include inner cities, rural areas, and may also include populations that we mentioned here, women starting business, minority-owned business, veterans, disabled veterans, low to moderate income area businesses, and so many others, individuals with disabilities. Those are the areas where SBA really excels, connecting you to the resources that you need, all of which have traditionally faced significant barriers. Morgan mentioned, her husband's, a disabled business person and his access through the 8A program. So it helps you to get to capital. It helps you to get to training and so many of these needed tools to be able to start and grow the businesses. And Terri, let's take a quick second here and talk a bit about the marriage between what SBA does and the USDA. Talk about the memorandum of understanding that we have with the USDA and how we work. We're fire and ice. We work together and make things happen. Talk about that a bit.
Sure. One of the things that we've really been striving to do is create this whole of government approach so that whether you come to SBA or USDA, if you are in need of, let's just say, capital or some sort of technical assistance, that even if you land at the wrong agency, that we have the ability to get you to someone who can help you, as opposed to just saying, here's a number or here's a website, go to it. So it's more of a synergistic, warm handoff. So we're really trying to work more collaboratively. And I'll give you an example. So one of the parts of USDA that I've been working a lot with is the beginning farmers and ranchers. So they have programs if you're a new farmer or rancher and you're just trying to, get the land and figure out how to start this business. They have resources that can fill that gap for you. Well, SBA, we deal with startups all the time, but our expertise isn't necessarily in ranching and ag. So us being able to say, okay, we can do this, but you can do that in terms of, how we work together as federal agencies is really important. So that's one thing that we've been trying to come together and do combined outreach, and do like national calls to say, hey, this is what USDA does. This is what SBA does. We don't care if you come to them or us or work with both of us. We're here to help you. And I think by us sort of bringing down those intergovernmental barriers, it's only going to benefit our constituents across the country because it can be very frustrating. I mean, even as federal employees, any of us who've tried to find someone in a different agency, it's not easy. So if we can somehow make that easier, then I feel like everyone benefits from it. So one of the other things that we're working with the USDA on, I mentioned the Rural Prosperity Network, or RPN, in those 5 states, and then they're going to onboard 4 more. In addition to just working in those specific states, we're also standing up, and it's actually up, but it's not fully populated, as a rural.gov website, so that this is going to be a place that you can go. It's hopefully going to be a one-stop shop. So regardless of what you're looking for, if you're in a rural community, you can go there and find the resources you need. Or on the rural health side, there's a portal, it's the RHI hub, so it's rural health. So again, if you're in that part of this economy where you work in healthcare, or if you are someone who just needs the services of telehealth or something like that, we want you to understand that there's also this website out there that just focuses on rural health. So these are the things that I'm working really hard on behind the scenes to make sure we have the dots connected for you, so that hopefully you don't have to do the work. We're trying to do the legwork for you, make it simpler, make it easier to navigate. Also, on the USDA side, we're planning to do some outreach for women-owned small businesses, where we're going to do for startups or newly formed businesses, where we're going to put together a cohort using our online Ascent curriculum. Right now, I have a cohort that I started. It's our pilot. It's 20 women that were selected from across the US. We had our official kickoff yesterday, and we're using the online curriculum in coordination with meeting virtually 6 times. So I'm really trying to get small businesses from across the country to start to talk to each other and become anchors in their communities. So these are just some of the things that we're trying to work on just to make it simpler. So hopefully you guys will see improvements. And if you ever have any ideas, it's rural@sba.gov. That's the website, or not the website, the email you can send things to. I'm always open to your ideas because you guys know what you need.
And so what's a cohort? First of all, explain that. And also you mentioned another website, just rural.gov. Because everybody's always looking for good resources for information. So what is a cohort? How do people get involved with it, with such an opportunity? And repeat that again about the rural.gov.
Okay, so rural.gov is going to be the website that's going to be the portal for, I believe it's 16 different agencies, including SBA.
That's great.
We're all federal. We all came together to say that there needs to be a better way for us to work together and bring down the barriers. So if you're in rural communities, and let's say, for example, you need USDA services or SBA services, or you just don't know who to go to, that rural.gov website, we're just launching it. So it's up. You can go out there. There's some information already on there. There's some fact sheets that you might find useful. But eventually, that will be like a single point of entry for folks and small businesses in rural communities to be able to just go to that single point of sign on and be able to get in there and see everything. And then in terms of the Ascent pilot, and we're calling it the Rural Ascent pilot program, what that is we advertised and had women from across the country, and it's open to men as well. But the curriculum is focused toward women, but there's nothing that would prohibit a gentleman from accessing the curriculum, and it's for free on our SBA website. So if you go under the Learning tab, and it's self-guided, so you can go and learn about different parts of business. And if you already have a business plan or you don't have a business plan, it's a good way to really get some basic foundational skills in business. It has journeys, that's what they call them. But the cohort was created from these folks who applied to become part of the pilot. So the cohort is that group of 20 women. And we'll see how it goes. And I hope to expand it further, but the USDA and SBA are planning something for early 23. So keep your eyes peeled. That is great.
That is great. And Morgan, we'll turn to you and more of the, the dump truck and a dream thing here. I want to talk about that. We're getting a lot of knowledge here, dump truck and a dream and the triangle. I love that between the bonding and the accounting and your insurance and finance. So how do you get a loan? How do you go from a truck and a dream? Tell us a little bit about, if you're a new business owner and you're watching this, or you know someone that you believe in them, you want to give them an opportunity. Talk a little bit about what for that business owner, get inside their mind. How should they be looking for securing capital and financial backing? Well, what are some thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited about this question, but I just want to say one thing about Terri's moment there. I'm understanding that the rural.gov is going to be a place to find information about contacts for different people in the government. And let me just tell you that sometimes I feel like I'm stalking someone trying to find their contact information within the government. So this sounds like a really good resource. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes.
But yes, so basically, how do you fund your dump truck to a dream, right? How do you get from A to B is what you're asking. And what I would say is, and what I have counseled many of our friends who are starting businesses or people who've worked with us in the past who are ready to grow towards business ownership, I've counseled them to do two things. Number one is to go to your local PTAC, because I'm under the impression those are in every state. I know our Arkansas Little Rock chapter of PTAC has been extremely helpful for us. They can teach you all about different types of local, federal, and contracting and all of that. If you're interested in any service that you could sell to the government, right? It's the goods or services that you could sell to the government. They're number one. So because you need to be able to do something, right? You have to be selling a good or a service. So PTAC is going to be a great first stop. PTAC can help you with connecting with some lenders, but I will say that I think the SBA would be a great, I know each SBA office has a person who that's their job, right, is to talk about lending, and that's where I would go. Or to reach out, if you have an existing relationship with a bank, to reach out and say, hey, do you have SBA backed loans here? Because many banks will have SBA backed loans within their regular commercial bank structure. So I would do those two things to find lending. And, if you have some money in the bank, back yourself, if you can do that, that's great. And that certainly worked for us. But the partnerships we currently have a wonderful financial partner. We use Farmers and Merchants Bank here in Arkansas, and they're a wonderful lender. And developing that relationship, getting lines of credit, all of that opens up so many doors for you. And don't think you have to go it alone. Don't think that you only are going to be backing yourself forever. It may start that way. You may have to start off with your own money. You may have to start off, it may be really tight for a while, is like what I like to say. But once you get a few contracts under your belt, once you get, a good financial at end of year, once you get that going, there will be financial institutions that want to work with you. Absolutely.
Especially when you have government contracting opportunities. I mean, that's just such a good point. And, Terri, what does the landscape look like for rural small businesses that want to participate in the government contracting space. And I know Morgan mentioned about she mentioned PTAC, and we know that is the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. So the Procurement Technical Assistance Center, if you want to, folks that are listening in, if you want to take a look at that, those are great resources. One of our resource partners is part of our chain of influence here. But Terri, for rural small businesses who want to participate in government contracting in that space, how can they find out about contracting opportunities? We know some people can go the 8A route based on qualifications, but government contracting for small businesses open across the board. So where do they go to learn about government contracting?
Yeah, so I always say that there's so much opportunity in the government contracting space for small businesses, and it's not easy. I'm going to put that out there, but this is what I always tell folks. It's not easy, but if it were easy, everyone would do it. So that means you have less competition. So take some time, skill up. It often makes sense if you're already doing some small municipal contracts in your local community, at the county level, at the state level. I would say the transition into federal isn't that difficult because the process is probably pretty similar. And the federal government, the US federal government, is the biggest consumer in the world. So whether it's a good or a service, chances are, if it exists, we buy it for something. It's just trying to figure out where you fit into that. So again, I think the PTACs are outstanding resources. They often are able to help you with some of the certification pieces. So if you're a woman-owned business, service-disabled veteran-owned small business, for the 8A program, that's a business you have to apply to with SBA, whether you're in a hub zone. And again, each of these are going to have, and I think I said woman-owned small business, but if I didn't, each of these are going to have set-aside opportunities as well. So really taking some time to understand how you fit into that landscape can be a huge benefit to you. And just merely on the fact that you're a small business, that gives you a benefit. So take the time and really try to learn about it, because number one, you have to understand it in order to try to venture into it. And then I think the second part of it is whenever you try to learn more and get those certifications, knowing what questions to ask are going to be the best use of your time and whatever partner you reach out to. And there's so many resources out there for you. The only thing you need to do is figure out how you fit into that space, and whether you have the financial capacity and the physical capacity, because there's nothing worse than applying for a federal contract, getting the contract, and not having the ability to perform on it. So I always say, make sure that it's a good fit for you. It's not for everyone, but for those that it is a good fit, it's an excellent way to diversify your revenue. The 8A program is another outstanding resource. It's a 9-year business development program. So if you're not familiar with that, take some time and look at our website and learn about that as well. And then if you have questions, and you're going to, if you don't, I'm going to scratch my head and say, please teach me, because every day it changes. But definitely reach out to any of the resources that we mentioned today. The other thing is reach out to folks that you know, peers in your industry. There is nothing wrong with talking to your competition and saying, hey, you're doing this, how'd you do it? Or, hey, I can help you, let me subcontract. Excellent way to learn government contracting, and it's subsidized because they have the contract, but you still get paid while they're waiting sometimes. So it's a good way to just sort of test the waters and see if it's something you want to do.
That's a great point, because especially with government contracting, sometimes it's a friendly competition. Sometimes people may be competing for contracts, but they also are your partner, because they need to be able to prime and sub and figure out where people fit into the equation, because they need capacity. So they need good partners. So, having those great relationships in the same space are so important. And, and of course, always contact your local SBA district office, with that kind of question. And you can go to sba.gov/local assistance. That's another good resource, sba.gov/local assistance, for information as well. But yeah, so as we look into government contracting, we mentioned before, we talked about the infrastructure bill that passed, and many don't realize, because it wasn't like this avalanche, like the post-pandemic PPP and these other financial, these waves of financial infusion. The infrastructure bill is something that will impact this nation, the biggest infusion for infrastructure around, bridges, waterways, ports, infrastructure that have decayed across the country, the biggest since World War II and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So it's a generational, once a generational type investment, multi-generational type investment that people need to get in front of. Terri, I know if they want to be able to take advantage of this. So beyond, so I want to ask Morgan this. So you mentioned your husband, and real briefly, just tell people in a short time frame, because believe it or not, we've had a long discussion, which has been great. It's gone along fast, but real quick, talk about the 8A program, that 8A, explain what that is, how you guys qualified, and how that opened the door for government contracting, what that really does for you.
Absolutely. So first of all, and I wanted to just mention this, if you are interested in federal contracting, you need to get registered on sam.gov. Okay, it's really not that hard. There's a lot of questions. Guys, I know there are a lot of questions on there, okay? But just if you get through it, chug through it, get registered, get in SAM, you can see all the government's opportunities for contracting. It's worth the time investment, okay? And even as an 8A, we use sam.gov as our major resource for finding new contract opportunities. So the 8A program, as Terri mentioned, it's a business development program. It lasts 9 years, and it essentially makes you a temporary set-aside company. So unlike a woman-owned business, or unlike a hub zone where it's as well, a hub zone, it's just for as long as your business is located in a hub zone, and for a woman-owned business, you're a woman-owned business forever, right? Unlike that, the 8A program is 9 years and then you've graduated. And the idea behind it is to build up a company to the point at which it can compete for those larger contracts, right? So it allows you to compete for some projects. You can get some projects will just be 8A competition. So you're just competing against other 8A contractors. This is a smaller pool, therefore hopefully a little less competition, maybe a little more profit. Additionally, you can get sole source opportunities where you can market directly to your government customer and kind of essentially prove through your past performance and all of these other things that your company is qualified for the project. And you can potentially negotiate that contract directly with the government, which is really an awesome opportunity. And so the 8A program allows your business to grow via limiting the competition that you're facing for these contracts, which is just a wonderful opportunity. Additionally, 8As have an opportunity to purchase federal surplus property. And so I know we're wrapping up. I'm going to be really quick. So 8As can purchase federal surplus property at a discounted rate. So for example, if there's a bulldozer that the government's, put into surplus property, you can buy it for a much discounted rate, which can just be great. So you have access to more equipment for less cost. And so anyway, amazing program. We're really grateful to be a part of it. And the Little Rock office of the SBA, Suzanne, Jerry, and all those guys out there, they're wonderful partners with us, and they've helped us a lot. Okay, that's it about the 8A program.
No, that's great. You did a phenomenal job. Terri, in about 2 minutes, any other resources that we have not talked about? That's what this call is all about. We want actionable opportunities. We have a tremendous amount of people watching right now. I'm so excited about that. Others will watch when this will be reviewed again. But Terri, real quick, couple minutes, other points of knowledge here about other resources, public and private, that you feel, along with SBA, along with USDA, that those looking to get started and grow a business. Talk about that for a moment.
Sure. Anyone who is a small business really needs to understand how to navigate the resources that we mentioned today. On the private industry side, I always tell folks, if you know where you fit into some major corporation, take a look at their Office of Small Disadvantaged Business. That's often the door that you can get into, even in companies that are downsizing the number of folks they have in their supply chain. If you provide something they need, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to do business with that company. So that research piece is really important. So I would say on the private industry side, figure out where you fit in and just do that research and use those offices to really be the advocates for you. And that's the same on the federal side. So don't negate the fact that within every federal agency that there's an office of small business advocacy usually, or there's an office of small and disadvantaged business utilization. So you'll hear the acronym OSDBU, OSDBU, and that's the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization. it always makes sense to take a look at those and understand how that federal agency that, buys what you sell, how you fit in there, and that can be an advocate for you as well. So, definitely use the SBA resources, our partners out there. And then on the private industry side, don't be afraid of those big companies. They need you. They want you to participate, and particularly in the rural areas. Just because you're in a rural area doesn't mean that you're not near where they need their supplies to be. So keep that in mind.
Absolutely great points, Terri. And man, I wish we had a whole nother hour. There's so much more we could get into. Maybe we'll do a part 2 of this series at some point. But I just want to thank you and everybody that's online with us now. This brings us towards the close of our discussion. And I would like to say thanks to our fantastic panel. Terri Billups is just phenomenal. Our SBA's acting director and deputy director for the Office of Rural Affairs with SBA, doing a phenomenal job. And Morgan, thank you so much. I think you put some real world oomph into this discussion, right? I love your triangle of success, and from a dump truck to a dream, right? And all the things that have gotten you there. I look forward to the next chapter of this discussion, but just doing an amazing job with Graylee Construction and Demolition there in Arkansas. So you're a hero to a lot. So thank you for joining us, and we appreciate it. So we'll take time now. It's been such a privilege to moderate today's forum. And as we get the opportunity together to uplift rural entrepreneurs and their quest to maintain and grow their businesses, and many times they feel isolated in the rural areas. That's the point I want to make. You're not isolated. Reach out virtually. There's so many people that are in your circle. Create your own circle. They don't even have to be in your industry. We all need support groups. Don't let yourself be isolated on the rural side. Reach out to the, again, SCORE chapter, SBDC, SBA. We'll put you in contact with so many other partners to be able to put you in a position to share knowledge and be successful across America. But as a reminder, this series has been recorded and it will be available to you on the SBA YouTube channel. If you've not been to the SBA YouTube channel, you got to check it out. Great knowledge there. And this will be up and running within the next 24 hours. And I would like to invite you as well. We do this every month. So to join us next month for another exciting Elevating Small Business series in September. And for more great topics, stay tuned to discuss small business opportunities across this country and how we can get you help to be successful. Hey, have a great week. For more information about SBA services, I encourage you to visit sba.gov. It's been great to have you here with us today, and thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great week of business. I'm Alan Thomas, the Regional Administrator, the Southeast U.S. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you.